Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to Go with me, Matthew Marsh. It's great to have you with us to look forward, of course, to the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. And I'm delighted to welcome for this special show, live and direct from Jeddah, the very wonderful Will Buxton. Hello, Will. Thanks for getting up early to be with us. Of course, this is a night race in Jeddah. Does it operate much like Singapore?
Yeah, from a timing perspective, hello mate, lovely to see you. From a timing perspective, it's very much like Singapore. Very, very similar. You know, everything is happening either at dusk or in the night itself. And it's really not too dissimilar, particularly once the lights go down. It has that same feel, it has that same vibe. The cars come alive and look so vibrant. And there's the intensity of the challenge for the drivers as well, which is very much like Singapore. But the track characteristics are entirely unique. It's so fast. It's so intense. The drivers yesterday, talking to them after the session, they were physically and mentally drained after qualifying, having to put everything on the line. It was... Yeah, I don't think they were expecting it to be quite the challenge that it has been, and I think the race itself is going to be particularly hard.
It's quite a big deal, isn't it, I think, for Formula One to be in Saudi Arabia, as it was when we first went to China, to India, to Russia. How does it feel to be there? What's the mood like in the paddock?
It's been very welcoming. It's, as with all new countries, it's kind of a little voyage of discovery, finding out about new places, different cultures, but we've been welcomed really warmly, really, with the circuit to get it completed in such a short amount of time. It's the quickest build, I think, of an F1 circuit in history. So to even be here, to even be racing, it's a phenomenal achievement.
And to be in Saudi itself, I mean, many people, many F1 fans won't have been there. Does it compare to any other cities or countries that you've been to on the F1 calendar?
It has that same vibe of a Bahrain, Abu Dhabi. I think just because of the climate, the temperature. Even, it's going to sound silly, but you're going to know what I mean. The way that the sunlight falls and lights the buildings. You imagine it like Instagram. You have so many different filters, and countries all have their own filter, and it very much feels like we're in kind of that Bahrain, Abu Dhabi Instagram filter with everything at the moment. It kind of has that feel, has that vibe to it, and not least for the kind of the sheer amount of dust and sand that there is in the air as well. It's got that kind of feel to it. But then we're by the sea as well, so it sort of feels a little bit like Valencia used to feel. It has that kind of, parts of it feel a little bit like Albert Park in Australia at the track. So it sort of has all these different facets all kind of melding together.
Sounds great. I wish I was there. And what about the mood in the paddock in terms of the championship? Does it feel like this could be a decider this weekend?
It's tense. It's so tense. Because Max can wrap up the title this weekend. It can be done. And Lewis has to, get the win, take it on to the next round. It's really tense. When Lewis was called to the stewards for apparently ignoring double waved yellow flags or possibly impeding drivers in free practice 3, there was real tension of, is he going to get a grid drop? And then with what happened with Max in qualifying, there's now the question coming into today of, well, is he going to need a new gearbox? It's very tense. It's incredibly nervy because we're 21 races through the season, 2 still to go, quite incredibly, and it's still on the line. It's still all to play for.
Yeah. Well, let's look at the results from qualifying. As you say, dramatic season so far with the 20 races we've had. We've had 21 qualifying sessions. I want to look at the grid now and see the results of what happened last night. As you said, Lewis Hamilton, Valtteri Bottas, Mercedes lockout. This is, of course, a provisional grid. We're hoping nothing will change. Max Verstappen currently shown there in 3rd. Charles Leclerc 4th. Tremendous performance for him after his crash on Friday. Sergio Perez and Pierre Gasly. Gasly in his almost customary P6. Norris and Tsunoda. Tsunoda having a good weekend, and then Ocon and Giovinazzi. Let's talk first about Hamilton and Mercedes. You spoke to Lewis, of course, after qualifying. How happy was he?
Happy, but very conscious of the fact that had Max completed his lap, there was no way that he'd be on pole. He knew it, he recognised it, whether it was the strength of the car or simply the strength of the lap that Max was putting in. Lewis knew he didn't have an answer for it. They couldn't have contended with that pace. So there's confidence, and I think with Lewis at the moment, he's on that rare vein of form that Lewis can pull out when his back is against the wall. And we've really seen this since Brazil. I think since that disqualification, since that engine change, he's had what Toto Wolff's described as superpowers, and you and I have seen it year in, year out, that when the chips are stacking up against him, Lewis can find an additional reserve from somewhere and pull out these mesmerizing performances. And even though, Mercedes have been on the back foot for a large part of this season, you wouldn't bet against Lewis or Mercedes now with 2 races to go in the form that he's in. And I think he just has that quiet assuredness that he knows what he's doing. He's in great form. And when push comes to shove, he can bring this thing home if he needs to.
There's a nice photograph there whilst you were talking of Lewis with Valtteri, and he called him out, didn't he, Lewis? Called out Valtteri as best teammate ever. How important do you think is the dynamic in the team and Valtteri as a support for Lewis?
I think it's massive, and I think Lewis is really going to miss Valtteri next year. I think that, the worst thing that has happened for Valtteri in his Formula One career is he's been teamed up week in, week out. Are truly astonishing. He's a phenomenal racing driver, but when you are pitched alongside one of the all-time greats, well, you're always going to come off slightly worse for wear and slightly beaten up in second best. And I think poor old Valtteri he's had that, But another great performance from him. He's done exactly what he needed to do. And Lewis will not be able to rely on a teammate who's working with him next year. He's going to have George Russell, and that will be an entirely different proposition for Lewis Hamilton. I think he's loved being with Valtteri. Let's not forget, Valtteri Bottas into Q3 yesterday for the 100th race in a row. No other driver has that on the grid. Just an astonishingly consistent run of form from the guy.
Exactly. And speaking of astonishing now, let's turn to Max Verstappen.
Oh.
I think everybody held their breath. How good was that lap?
For 26 corners, it was one of the best things I've ever seen in Formula One. And for one corner, it wasn't. It was phenomenal. When you have drivers like Fernando Alonso and Daniel Ricciardo, and actually all the drivers who were in the TV interview pen being interviewed, they all stopped. And they all watched it, because from the first couple of corners when he almost hit the wall, everyone was looking at it as, well, the lap's kind of gone. And then he cuts the first sector and he's up. And he was over the limit from the start of the lap. And you knew he was pulling in something special if he pulled it off. And it was electric, that lap. It was just beautiful. I mean, Matthew, you know what it is to race. You know what it is to take a car to the limits of what is physically possible with a car. And Max Verstappen had it on such a fine edge. To try and describe it to people at home what it's like, having spoken to racing drivers all my life, the only way I can describe it is when you're a kid and you're at school and you're leaning back on your chair and suddenly gravity takes over and the chair starts to fall backwards and you catch it. It's that moment where your gut kind of jumps and your heart rate increases. That's what being on the edge on that kind of a qualifying lap is like for the entire lap. It's that feeling. And he had that, and he held it, and it just that one moment at the end. Has it cost him the chance of competing for the win this weekend? He may need to take a gearbox penalty. That was a big hit on the rear right. We saw the suspension arm hanging down afterwards. If he has impacted that gearbox, That's a P8 start. If the team opt not to change that gearbox, does he find himself potentially in a Leclerc situation from Monaco, where the car might fail even on the way to the grid? I don't think Red Bull can afford to take that kind of a risk with the championship in the balance. If he does find himself P8, let's be honest, he'll have 2 AlphaTauris ahead of him, who will be very nice and get out of his way. He'll have Lando Norris, who starts on a set of softs and knows he's starting on the wrong tyres for the race. It should be an easy one to pick off, which means he only really has to pass Charles Leclerc before he finds Sergio Perez, who will let him through, and he can then go and chase after Valtteri Bottas and Lewis Hamilton ahead. I don't think it's the end of the world if Max ends up starting this race in P8, but the potential that lap showed, and Lewis Hamilton was only too aware of it, shows that Max Verstappen will be a force in this Grand Prix. And as we've seen from Formula 2 races this weekend, he can pass here.
Yeah. Well, and you can also crash. We noticed that. The focus.
Wow. Yeah.
The focus, of course, in this conversation has been on winning, but it also, of course, means that somebody must lose, which, to be frank, is mostly what I experience as a racing driver. You mentioned my own driving career. You've studied defeat in great detail for your book, which I've thoroughly enjoyed reading. I, of course, recommend it to our viewers. It's called My Greatest Defeat, and you undertook, I think, 20 interviews with legends of the sport. What did you learn from writing that book?
What was really interesting was that the vast majority of defeats that the drivers discussed with me weren't defeats on track. They were defeats that they experienced off track. But I think racing drivers, when they're really in the eye of the storm and really at the height of their competitive careers, tend not to focus on things off the track. They only focus on what's going on the track. And with that, they have quite a singular perspective and singular mind, and it's the same mindset that they carry into a race. You screw up a corner, you can't think about the mistake that you've made. You have to constantly be focusing on the next corner, or you're going to mess that one up as well. And I think that's the mindset that somebody like a Max Verstappen will have going into today. You don't focus on what has just been and gone, you only look ahead. And with that in mind, it's very much deal with the consequences, deal with the disappointments when they all tally up and the season is over. Max has said all the way through this year he's concentrating on the small details. He's not even celebrating the wins. He will only celebrate when he gets to the end of the season. The same, I think, is true of Lewis. He works religiously on improving himself, but focusing on what's done right and what's done well, learning from what has gone before and hasn't been done quite so well, but never dwelling on it. From a racing perspective, that's a positive. From a human perspective, not dealing with things as they come to us can actually prove to be a huge negative, because everything piles up. And then when they leave this world of racing and start what we would refer to as a normal life, there's an awful lot of unresolved mental anguish and mental sort of difficulties that they then have to deal with.
It's a great book, Will, I must say. The only problem with my copy is that for some reason it hasn't got your signature in it and a really nice inscription about how I was.
How did that happen?
For you, obviously, I don't know, mate, an inspiration to you and all that. But we can get that fixed, I presume.
Well, I tell you what, my friend, it's probably worth more not being signed. There are a lot of copies out there that are signed. I think you've got one of the few that isn't.
Well, two things on that before we move on, which is, one is, our copy is still available. Can people still find this book? And secondly, the illustrations. Yes. I can't remember who it was, but they're beautiful. I love the illustrations, almost as much as your writing.
Thank you. So yes, you can still purchase the book online from online retailers, and also from Evro. EVRO Publishing, which is the publishing house that took it to print. The illustrations are actually by a guy called Giuseppe Camuncoli, who is a very famous graphic illustrator. He works on Spider-Man, on the Darth Vader comics. So he's worked with a number of the stables, DC Comics and Marvel, and yeah, a wonderful guy. Italian, actually, from just down the road from Maranello is where he lives. So a lifelong F1 fan, but also just a brilliant illustrator who I think really brought out the humanity of the drivers, and actually, drew them not at the time when they were racers, but at the age that they were when we spoke. Some of them sort of very much with the ravages of time, and it was an honour to speak to the drivers that we did, because it wasn't just Formula One drivers. There were the drivers from NASCAR, from IndyCar, from World Endurance, drivers like Tom Christensen or Jeff Gordon, and I was really lucky to be able to speak to Niki Lauda and Bobby Unser, who are both sadly no longer with us, but who gave their time and gave really beautiful insights into themselves as men and as drivers.
Yeah, and speaking of giving time, we need to let you get to the racetrack. You've been fabulous. But before you go, I want to ask you, because you seem to be very, very busy, and that's why we're so grateful for your time today, Will. What's a typical F1 weekend look like for you?
A blur. It's. I mean, you know how it is, mate. It goes by incredibly quickly. We tend to land on a Wednesday these days. Thursday is full on all day, interviewing the drivers, interviewing team personnel, putting together preview television shows. I think I did 2 or 3 on the Thursday. Friday is a fairly easy day because there's so much track action, so much running in practice. But again, I'm making the Tech Talk F1 TV show on the Friday, and then interviewing all the drivers after the sessions. They've opened the pit lane up again now, so I'm back in the pit lane reporting for F1 TV during the sessions, everything that's going on during those sessions. And then Saturday's probably one of my favorite days. Again, back in the pit lane for FP3, then talking to the drivers immediately after they get out of the cars in qualifying, dealing with the disappointments or the happiness. And then moving into Sunday, we have the pre-race show, then the Grand Prix itself, then the post-race show. Then we're making additional shows after the post-race show is over. Then jump on a plane on Monday, go to the next race, try and get a little bit of rest, do some research, do some prep work Tuesday, Wednesday, straight back into it on Thursday. Do that 23 times a year. Hopefully see something of your family and your friends, and that's 12 months gone.
It is. Well, the season's over in a week, or 8 days to be precise, and right now you've got something important coming up, which is important to you, and I think it's fabulous. Tell us about that. I've got quite a bit. I'm getting married next year. So that's going to be a huge amount of fun. But first and foremost is Christmas, I guess. Isn't there an awards ceremony that we?
There is. Yes, but it's been delayed. It's been delayed. So it was due to be happening on the 19th of December. I've been asked to host the Autosport Awards. But it's now been delayed until February because the UK has sort of tightened its COVID restrictions again, and so international travel in has become a little bit more complicated. So they've delayed that by a few months. But I'm tremendously honoured to have been asked. I grew up reading Autosport. The whole reason I wanted to become a Formula One journalist was reading Autosport magazines. It's why so many of us got involved in the sport and wanted to become involved in the sport. It was our lifeline and Bible of motor racing. So yeah, to be asked to do that is it's a big thing, man, and I'm genuinely truly honoured.
And you're the right person for the job. Well, I need to let you get on. It's fantastic to have had you. Really appreciate your time, and keep doing the great work. We'll keep watching you. Fantastic.
Thank you so much, mate, and congratulations to you and on all that you guys are doing. This is an absolutely fabulous thing, and I couldn't be happier for you, mate. This is absolutely brilliant.
Fab. There he is. Thanks very much to Will Buxton. It's almost it from me as well here in Hong Kong. Only remains for me to remind you, my teeth back in, that we will be live to review the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix immediately after the race with Stefan Johansson, former, of course, Formula One driver himself, with Ferrari and McLaren. The great Alex Young will be joining us both, of course, for his own insight. 3 p.m. Eastern Time if you're in the USA, 8 p.m. UK, about, I think it's 1:30 in the morning in India, and it's 4 o'clock in the morning if you're in my time zone, which is Hong Kong, Singapore, Malaysia. Of course, like this show, it will be available on demand. That's the show. If you like what you've seen, please give us a thumbs up, a like, a retweet, follow us, whatever it is you need to do on the various platforms, please. It does make a difference to us, and we do appreciate it very much. My thanks again, of course, to Will Buxton and the fabulous production crew that puts this together. Enjoy the race.